What happens when a conversation meant to unite turns into a moment that divides a nation? That's the haunting question that still lingers after the tragedy at Utah Valley University. A day when an event about free speech and debate ended in silence and disbelief. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe for more reports that look beyond headlines and into the stories shaping our times. On what was supposed to be an ordinary September afternoon, Utah Valley University became the center of a story no one expected to witness. Charlie Kirk, a well-known political commentator and speaker, had come to campus as part of his Prove Me Wrong tour, a traveling series of discussions designed to challenge ideas through open debate. The event drew a large crowd. Students, parents, and community members gathered, eager to listen, learn, and maybe even argue their own points. But in a single moment, the atmosphere shifted from excitement to chaos. A sound, sharp and unexpected, cut through the cheers. Within seconds, confusion turned to panic. What began as a celebration of conversation ended as a national tragedy. Witnesses described the scene as surreal. For many, it felt impossible to grasp what had just happened. Among those who were there were 4 individuals, Jason, Christian, Kurt, and Carter, who did not know one another before that day but would forever share a bond formed in the midst of crisis. Their accounts, though different in detail, align in one emotion: disbelief. Jason, who had come mostly out of curiosity, remembered the anticipation in the air. He arrived early, hoping to get a good view of the stage. The energy was contagious, he recalled later. People were cheering, laughing, just happy to be there. Christian and his teenage son found a spot close to the stage, thrilled that Kirk had even tossed a hat to his son personally. Carter, the youngest of the group at just 15, said her family's passion for politics drew them there. She remembered watching her mother smile proudly as she recorded the moment on her phone. Then came the sound that changed everything. At first, many thought it was a firework, a harmless pop that could have been part of the excitement. But within seconds, confusion spread through the crowd. People ducked, others froze. Some screamed, unsure whether to run or stay still. Those near the front saw something that made it all too real, and panic rippled through the thousands gathered on campus. The moment defied comprehension. Christian said his first instinct was to protect his son, taking cover while scanning for danger. It felt unreal, he said. You never think something like that could happen at a college event. Kurt, a combat veteran and former law enforcement officer, reacted on instinct, guiding people toward safety, checking on those around him, and trying to stay calm despite the shock. There was chaos everywhere, he remembered. But I kept thinking, help who you can, keep people moving. As police moved to secure the area, confusion gave way to the grim realization that the event had turned into something much darker. The cheers that had filled the air minutes earlier were replaced by silence, interrupted only by cries and hurried footsteps. For many, it was more than just witnessing a violent act. It was the shattering of a sense of safety in a place meant for ideas and discussion. In the days that followed, survivors struggled to process what they had seen. The trauma didn't end when they left campus. It lingered in small, unexpected ways. Some described sleepless nights and flashbacks. For others, it was certain sounds, a door slamming, fireworks crackling, that brought everything rushing back. Jason said he found himself spending late nights online, trying to correct false information about what happened at his school. Christian turned to helping others as a way to cope, creating a support group for those who had been at the event. Helping people talk about it helped me heal, he said. We were all trying to make sense of something senseless. Therapists and grief counselors soon became part of the story, as communities around UVU worked to provide comfort and guidance. The emotional toll was particularly heavy on younger attendees like Carter. She spoke about how her world changed that day, how ordinary things no longer felt ordinary. You start to notice how fragile life is, she said softly. Even the things that used to make you happy start to feel different. Yet even through fear and grief, there was resilience. Kurt, despite his background in combat, admitted that the emotional aftermath was harder than he expected. He found solace in helping others, checking in on neighbors, supporting families, and reminding people that compassion still existed amid chaos. Mr. Rogers used to say, "Look for the helpers," he said. That's what I tried to be that day. In the weeks that followed, many who were there turned their focus toward recovery and meaning. Support groups grew larger, not just for those who had been physically present but for others in the community who felt emotionally shaken by what had happened. Online forums and local gatherings became safe spaces to talk about fear, loss, and hope. The conversations often shifted from grief to resilience, from "why did this happen" to "how do we move forward?" For Carter, moving forward meant turning her pain into purpose. Along with other students, she helped start a Turning Point USA chapter at her high school, something she said helped her feel connected to the ideals of discussion and patriotism that Kirk had represented. It brought people together, she said. It reminded us why we can't give up on talking to each other. The tragedy also reignited an old debate about justice and consequence. Some called for harsh penalties, others urged compassion and reform. For those closest to the event, the discussion wasn't abstract, it was personal. Christian, who had worked in corrections, spoke about his conflicted feelings. "Justice has to mean something," he said. "But so does mercy. You can't have one without the other." The conversations reflected a broader struggle across the country about how to balance accountability with humanity, a theme that often emerges after acts of public violence. Still, amid their differences, the survivors shared one conviction: fear cannot win. No matter what they had seen or how much it had shaken them, they refused to let tragedy silence their belief in free speech or in the power of dialogue. For them, silence was never safety, it was surrender. And surrender, they agreed, would mean letting the very idea of conversation die. Jason, one of the students who had been closest to the scene that afternoon, said the experience changed how he viewed debate, disagreement, and courage. "I used to avoid heated conversations," he admitted quietly. "I didn't want to upset people or start arguments. But now, I see discussions, even the tough ones, as more valuable than ever." "If you disagree with someone," he said, pausing to gather his thoughts, "don't shut them down. Talk to them. Ask questions." That's what Charlie always stood for. To those who knew Charlie, that sentiment struck deeply. He had built his platform around the idea that strong opinions and open dialogue could coexist. Even his critics, many of whom disagreed with his politics, often said they respected his willingness to show up and talk. That spirit his friends felt had to survive. It became a mission, not to erase what happened, but to redefine what could come next. Their message grew quietly at first, passed from conversation to conversation in classrooms, student meetings, and late-night gatherings. What began as a small circle of friends soon evolved into something larger, a reminder that unity does not come from agreement, but from empathy. It was an idea so simple, yet so rare in today's divided world, that people can hold conflicting beliefs and still share respect, compassion, and humanity. Kurt, another survivor who had once been skeptical of dialogue with opposing voices, put it plainly. "We can't live in fear," he said. "Good will always outweigh evil, but only if we keep choosing to talk, not fight." His words caught on, spreading across the UVU campus and beyond. Students began printing them on posters, sharing them on social media, and quoting them in classroom discussions. The phrase "talk, not fight" became an informal motto, one that captured both pain and hope. In the weeks that followed, the UVU community became a testing ground for what healing through dialogue could look like. Professors opened their classrooms to difficult discussions about fear, violence, and free speech. Students who might never have spoken before sat across from each other in open forums, sometimes trembling, sometimes crying, but always trying to understand. One philosophy professor described those sessions as the most honest conversations I've ever seen on this campus. And then something remarkable happened. People outside the university began to take notice. News outlets reported not only on the tragedy, but also on the conversations it sparked. Across the nation, students, teachers, and civic groups began exploring ways to restore civility and debate, to create spaces where disagreement didn't have to mean division. Town halls in distant cities referenced UVU as an example of how communities could respond to conflict without turning on one another. The tragedy, painful as it was, revealed something profound about American society. Beneath the noise of outrage and division, there remained a quiet longing, a desire to heal through conversation. For every headline that spoke of hate, there were dozens of unseen acts of grace, people reaching out, listening, forgiving, and trying to rebuild trust. What had begun as a local wound became a national reflection. But the survivors also discovered something personal, something no class or lecture could teach. Trauma changes perspective. Many of them found themselves looking at life differently, not through the lens of fear, but through a deeper appreciation for connection. Carter, a journalism student who had once prided herself on keeping up with every social media debate, made a simple but powerful change. "I deleted all my apps," she said. Twitter, Instagram, everything. "I realized I was spending hours arguing with people I didn't even know. Now, I just try to talk to people face to face. It's easy to argue online, but when you look someone in the eye, you realize we're not that different." Others found healing in unexpected ways. Jason started volunteering at a community center, helping organize workshops on respectful debate. Kurt joined a group that visited high schools to talk about empathy and communication. Even months later, they said, the memory of that day stayed vivid, but it no longer carried only pain. It carried purpose. The story of September 10th at Utah Valley University was no longer just about a moment of violence. It became about what came after. About 4 people who saw something they would never forget, but who refused to let that moment define only grief. They turned toward each other, toward their community, and toward the hard, sometimes uncomfortable work of healing. Their courage wasn't loud. It wasn't about protests or statements. It was about showing up, listening, and refusing to give in to despair. In doing so, they reminded the nation of something essential. Even when words fail, compassion doesn't have to. Conversations can be messy. They can hurt, but they can also rebuild what fear tries to break. And in that rebuilding, something more powerful than certainty emerges: understanding. For the UVU community, the months that followed became a time of rebuilding trust. The campus created new dialogue circles where students could share thoughts about everything from politics to mental health. Professors worked with counselors to ensure that discussions remained safe yet honest. Local churches and civic groups partnered to host community dinners, events where people from all walks of life could sit at the same table, eat together, and simply talk. It was small, almost ordinary, but deeply human. Out of tragedy came a new culture of conversation. The university's president later said that the event had forced a reckoning, not just about safety, but about what it means to be part of a shared society. "We realized," she said, "that safety isn't only about locks and cameras. It's also about trust, empathy, and communication." That reflection resonated nationwide, inspiring schools and organizations to think differently about how to create environments where people feel both safe and heard. Meanwhile, national discussions about polarization, fear, and free speech intensified. Commentators debated what the incident symbolized. Some saw it as another example of the dangers of division. Others saw it as proof that America still had the capacity to heal. But amid the noise, one message from UVU stood out clearly: courage isn't always dramatic. Sometimes, courage is choosing to listen when it would be easier to shout. Sometimes, it's asking a question instead of assuming an answer. The tragedy forced many to confront uncomfortable truths, not just about security or politics, but about the state of conversation itself. When did disagreement become danger? When did debate turn into hostility? The students who lived through that day didn't have all the answers, but they had learned one thing: silence helps no one. "We can't solve what we refuse to talk about," Jason said. "If we stop talking, the fear wins." And we promised it never would. Months turned into a year, and yet the echoes of that day never fully faded. Every anniversary brought renewed reflection. There were memorials, yes, but there were also forums, podcasts, and classroom projects dedicated to dialogue. The survivors spoke at conferences, sharing how their experience reshaped their views on courage and connection. Their story began appearing in textbooks and essays about civic discourse, an example of resilience through conversation. Beyond UVU, the movement found quiet momentum. In places like Ohio, Georgia, and Oregon, schools began organizing Talk Not Fight Days, moments for students to engage in respectful discussions about controversial topics. Civic groups used UVU's example to model community healing after local crises. Even online, where hostility often thrives, some corners of social media adopted the message. Hashtags like #TalkNotFight and #FearCannotWin appeared beneath posts encouraging empathy and dialogue. For Carter, Jason, Kurt, and the others, seeing that message spread was both humbling and bittersweet. "We didn't set out to start anything," Carter said. "We were just trying to find a way to keep going. But if our pain can help others find peace, then maybe that's something good that came from it." Their resilience became a quiet counterpoint to cynicism, a reminder that even after darkness, light can find its way back through the cracks of conversation. Theirs was not a story of heroes, but of human beings who chose to heal rather than hate. And as the years pass, the lesson remains timeless. Freedom of thought and compassion for others must stand side by side, or we risk losing both. A society that values speech but not empathy can fracture just as deeply as one that values empathy but silences speech. True freedom, they came to understand, requires both, the courage to speak and the humility to listen. Today, when students walk through the UVU campus, they still see reminders of that message. A small plaque near the student center bears an inscription: "Fear cannot win." Beneath it, someone added in smaller letters, "Talk, not fight." Visitors often stop to read it, unaware of the full story behind those words. But for those who lived it, that plaque isn't just a memorial, it's a promise. The promise that tragedy will not silence truth. That even in moments of confusion and loss, dialogue remains the bridge back to understanding. And that in choosing to talk, humanity chooses hope. If stories like this move you, if they remind you of what's still possible when people listen instead of divide, don't forget to subscribe for more reports that explore the human side of the headlines. Because in the end, journalism isn't just about what happens. It's about what we do after it happens, how we learn, how we heal, and how we keep talking, even when it's hard.